2001 saw the release of the movie based on Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, captivating literally thousands of children worldwide.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Electronic Arts got the license to release games based on this luxurious property. Now, what do you do as a publisher if you want to release a game that would catch absolutely every potential player out there? You release it for absolutely every platform, of course. Now, what do you do if all the platforms have different architectures that you can't spend time on porting? You hire more development teams to do a separate game for each platform, of course, and then market it as one and the same game, bringing confusion to thousands of young players online who don't understand why they don't seem to have things in their games that other people do. Look, don't ask, the 2000s were weird like that. In the end, there are actually 5 absolutely different games, all named Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. 4 of them were released in 2001 and 1 in 2003. Every version will be dissected, but in this particular video we'll discuss the PC version developed by No Wonder. It's an action-adventure game where we take control of, naturally, Harry Potter during his first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Throughout the adventure, you'll meet new friends, learn different spells, and uncover the mystery behind the Philosopher's Stone. My name is Stanislav Costiuc, I am a game designer, and this is my review of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for PC. As always, we'll dissect the game using my Stasocritic scoring system, and without further ado, let's jump into its first category: design. This category of Stasocritic has the biggest weight, 4. I think the reasons would be quite obvious, as gameplay is extremely important. Of course, we can't do an absolutely clean separation between any of the categories. In all good games, they would intertwine. But here we'll focus mostly on everything related to interaction. First, let's try to define the game's core pillars. It is based on Harry Potter, so the respective world and theme are of course going to be relevant. But in terms of gameplay pillars, the most written ones would be spellcasting and collectibles. That last one may seem weird, but with the amount of collecting you do throughout the game, it's clearly a focal point and a part of the core loop. What you're doing minute to minute is navigating the environments, casting spells to get past obstacles or discover secrets, all so you could collect something, including items defined as main objectives, like challenge stars, fire seeds, or potion ingredients. The game puts you into situations where you need to get a bunch of them on your way to the end of the level. In fact, those situations are a regular part of the game's pacing. A typical section looks like this. You have a segment where you need to reach a certain place, then most of the time you get to a class teaching a new spell, followed by a collectathon obstacle range, and then a broomstick level to break up the pace. This is essentially how the whole game goes until the final segments, where we have some set pieces, boss battles, and, get ready, a forced stealth section in an action-adventure game not designed for stealth. I don't know why so many games of this kind have always been fascinated with putting sneaking sections, they rarely work. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about everything else you get to collect in the game. So there are house cup points, but they don't matter. Even though there's a whole UI section showing how many points each of the Hogwarts houses has gathered up until this point, there is no actual competition involved. You will win at the end regardless of your performance. So these extra points that you get for perfecting lessons or finding absolutely all challenge stars are there just for completionist purposes. The item that you'll collect the most of are the multi-flavored beans, and you need them for 2 things. 1, if you give enough beans to Fred and George Weasley, you'll get a pretty weird secret ending scene. Okay, that's something. 2, the same Fred and George will give you wizard cards. Now, those 2 boys are just one source of the cards. Most of the time you'll find them in secret locations. And even though they bear no practical purpose, the cards do have very nice art, and that is reason enough to want to get them. You receive the very last wizard card only if you collect the other 24 by the end of the game. I didn't. In fact, during the second half I didn't care that much about reaching locations that would obviously give you a card, because I knew all too well that I've already missed one anyway with absolutely no other way to get it. Granted, while permanently missable cards are an annoyance, there are a couple things that make it worse. First, the only indicator of how many cards there are in a level is on the short title screen before it begins. There is absolutely no way to know how many of the cards available you have already collected, which is especially bad when you're loading a saved game in the middle of a level. But even worse are unclear level end triggers. As an example, one area had 2 wizard cards, I only found 1. There was a spot which I didn't quite know how to get to, but I knew it most likely led to what I needed, and in the distance was Hagrid's hut, which I had to reach as part of my main goal. I could gather that getting to the gate would end the level. What I didn't know though is that if I would just approach it from a fairly big distance in an attempt to find a path to the secret place, the game would still trigger a cutscene of me entering the hut, and then the next level would start, overriding my last save. No way to even try to get the card without replaying the whole game. That is a hefty number of moments like this. Sometimes you don't even know that a door you're opening will lead to an absolutely different level. And that's really annoying, mostly because the cards themselves are not that difficult to find. Levels in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone are mostly very linear. They are actually structured in a way that you revisit different locations from time to time, creating a nice effect of going through interconnected space. But at the end of the day, they're still essentially straight paths with secrets protruding at different points. Some locations have a bit more exploratory elements to them, but you're still steered towards the same main path, and there is nothing wrong with that approach. But its effectiveness depends on 2 things: the quality of actual level design and core gameplay mechanics. Level design here is fine. Yes, there are issues like unclear ending triggers similar to the ones I've mentioned that can mess up the collection gameplay, and at least one instance where a combination of your actions can block you from progressing and force to restart at the latest checkpoint. But by and large, these are fine levels. If we take the Flipendo challenge, it's a nice array of varying obstacles that test your pathfinding skills, environment observation, jumping precision, alongside combining a couple of those things together. Some levels get more verticality, like the Lumos challenge, where you will explore the same environments through different heights. Even the levels designed for stealth sections are fine, with enough ways to avoid filch and test your skills over and over again, as you need to recontextualize the room that you're in after opening every door. Yes, there is nothing particularly great that would make me want to draw level plans and showcase just why these levels are so good, but there is nothing bad enough to make me want to do the same kind of thing only to showcase why it doesn't work. They're fine. The core gameplay, on the other hand, first, the character does not strafe unless you're in a specific section where the camera is locked onto a boss. This means that you have to control Harry through tank-like controls. And that can be fine unless you need to do slight corrections of your movement, in which case you look like a car that tries to switch to another parking spot. And unless you're in a room full of gnomes, which can make it difficult to avoid them or find them in the first place. Then there is jumping. To be fair, the basic jump is fine. The strafe steering being the only way to course correct yourself during a jump is a bit weird, but it works. The frustrating element of jumping is the fact that Harry can't climb any ledge he gets to while midair unless he falls down far enough to grab it with his hands. Which not only looks weird, it can create a lot of strange situations when there is no bottomless pits below you. And to climb something that's not very high, you need to just walk towards it, but that combined with tanky controls means that in some situations you'll climb objects on accident a lot. It doesn't help that the climbing animation is pretty long. And then there's the camera, which is not the worst but also not great. It's fixated to the character's back unless you're trying to cast a spell, in which case it follows the targeting particles a bit. You can't rotate the camera without rotating the character. The position of the camera while standing and moving is different, and that can get pretty annoying, and you can look up and down only while standing still, with the exception of moving platforms. I guess because you change coordinates, the game doesn't count that as standing still. And while the fact that jumping on platforms below your height is essentially a matter of faith, to be fair, has never led to any issues. The collision detection is wide enough that Harry can save himself from many potential falls. The broomstick flying may not be part of the core gameplay loop, but it is still a very often met type of levels, most of which are based on catching up and staying close to an object. And while the controls for flying are decent enough, because of the camera it can be really tricky to keep track of the object. And also, honestly, the levels themselves aren't that exciting. Even Quidditch matches are just set dressings, there is no challenge or variety. Speaking of variety, the game tries to introduce some by adding a big stealth section close to the end of the game, and to be fair, it is not an entirely bad attempt. Harry is wearing an invisibility cloak and is only visible when casting spells, so he can be caught only while doing that or bumping into Filch or his cat. They still react to sound, and there is a clear separation between rugs, where Harry's footsteps will be quiet, and wood planks, where they will be loud. Alright, good enough. And the levels, as I've mentioned, are fine. So why does the stealth section still doesn't work? Two reasons. First, you have no real way of knowing what is the distance at which Filch will hear your footsteps on the planks. Second, there is no way to sacrifice speed for silence, meaning that if you get into a situation where Filch is really close, you're pretty much stuck and better just get caught and restart from the last checkpoint. Other than that, there are a bunch of other small issues in the game, like the character being able to take damage while out of player's control during cutscenes, or the stun when getting hit being a bit too long, which can make it really difficult to avoid some attack patterns. But all those things you can live with. The most disappointing aspect of the core gameplay that is harder to ignore is spellcasting. Now, I have played this game as a child, and what I always did back then is move my mouse in the same pattern as the spell icon, and I always thought that was a very cool mechanic. So imagine my surprise when I learned while replaying the game for this video that you don't have to do that. All that is required from you is just to point at an interactive object, and the appropriate spell will be cast once you release the mouse button. First, this puts the inclusion of spell lessons under question. Why does one need to have lessons of tracing and memorizing a particular shape if that shape is not useful at all? You don't need to actually know any spells, you just point and cast at whatever has interaction assigned to it. This trivializes the gameplay a lot, to the point that you don't even have to care that much what and when you cast. And I know it's a game aimed at children, but don't underestimate young players. Then the aiming is not consistent at all. Sometimes your mouse will not move and you'll have to use the movement key buttons to assist with targeting, but also there are times when spells fail for no reason. So not only is spellcasting incredibly simple, it also doesn't always work properly. And specific wand movement for casting spells is a thing that would make the game feel distinctly Harry Potter on a mechanical level. It's something you wouldn't be able to apply to any game world. But with that not being the case, if you go back to the core pillars of the game and distribute all main mechanics and concepts that are present, we'll see that there is nothing in the center point. The world of Harry Potter is only a thematic wrapper, and it's used well enough, but if you remove it, nothing will break or have to be significantly changed. To put it this way, the license doesn't really matter for gameplay. And it can be argued whether that's really important or not. After all, the gameplay would be extremely polished and well defined, with the absence of Harry Potter specific mechanics being negative. Probably not, but the gameplay is not polished. It's adequate at best, spread around levels that are just fine, and the most valuable thing the game can provide, the license, is pretty optional as well. So let's take a look at the score breakdown for design. Feel free to pause the screen if you'd like. Taking what I have said into account, I will assign a 4. I can't call the design here bad, but I also don't think I have mentioned a single aspect of the game that isn't flawed one way or another, so that score seems to fit the most. Now, let's get on to our next category, context. This category has a weight of 1 because context is not necessarily about defining the experience, but enhancing it by providing proper role, motivation, plot, whatever is needed to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Now, even though Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is based on the movie and book of the same name, we will not take the source material into account, just the game itself. And if you don't know anything about Harry Potter, you're out of luck. Let's just put it this way, the main antagonist is not even mentioned at all until the very end of the game. The titular Philosopher's Stone is also not mentioned at all until the kids suddenly try to stop presumably Snape from stealing it. In the beginning there's a general explanation of who Harry is and how he got to Hogwarts, but it's omitted in a lot of details. Important characters are introduced in "Hey, remember me" way.
Hey Harry! Remember me? Ron Weasley!
Hello Harry, it's me, Hermione Granger. We met on the Hogwarts Express, remember?
Hello, Harry, it's me, Hagrid.
Flow is all over the place. For example, Professor Snape is shown as being suspicious before you even know who Snape is. The lesson with him will come later than that cutscene. And there's a surprisingly big focus on things that aren't mandatory for the plot to work. For example, helping the dragon Norbert to hatch as well as sneaking him up to the tower to send off to Romania gets a lot of focus. But that's not relevant for the main plot at all. Instead of sneaking past the library to send off Norbert, the motivation could be to sneak in and out of the library to get the book that will tell about the stone. Some things just don't make sense in the context of the levels. For example, in the troll sequence, Ron tells Harry that the troll trapped Hermione in the bathroom. It's weird that he knows that already, but sure, let's go to the bathroom. Except the troll is not there. He will chase us on the set-piece jumping level towards the bathroom. The thing is, you could reshuffle some things and write some dialogues in such a way that it would build a narrative that makes sense, even if it wouldn't transmit all the themes and character arcs from the source material. As it is now, not only is the game thematically lacking, but you don't always understand what is going on unless you already know what should be going on, and even within what's available the pacing is weird and at times we get contradictory information. So let's take a look at the possible ratings for context. Based on what I have said, I will assign a 3. If you have no knowledge of the source material, you will understand on a broad basic level who you are and what are generally speaking your goals, but that will be accompanied by a lot of confusion, poor dialogue, and even some nonsense, though nothing comparable to Rowling's internet ramblings. Time to talk about aesthetics. This category has a weight of 1 as well, and that's because it also doesn't define the experience, but does enhance it through visuals, sounds, music, and everything else that can please the senses. I think when it comes to the graphics of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we need to do a separation of two things: visual style and graphical implementation. The chosen visual style is pretty good. It doesn't try to fully recreate the movies, but rather do something of its own, something a bit more cartoony, and it fits. Hogwarts has a warm tonality that makes it look appropriately magical. Characters are recognizable, though some faces are weird. There's a lot of neat details like ropes swaying in the air during movement or Harry correcting his glasses during an idle animation. But there's a bunch of little problems. First, characters don't move their mouths at all, which is very weird for a game with voice acting, and in 2001 there were possibilities to implement mouth movement in 3D games, at the least through textures. Then a lot of things just don't look great. When you're casting a spell during a locked-in section, Harry will just slide through the floor if you move him. A lot of times you climb invisible ledges, and the weird jump grab I mentioned in the design section, well, it looks aesthetically strange as well. There is enough sound effects to create an appropriate atmosphere and locations that fit their visuals and mood, but sometimes they just bug out. Voice acting is alright at most.
Welcome to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I am Albus Dumbledore, your headmaster.
It is weird that Harry is talking very rarely in cutscenes, and you will hear his voice mostly through casting spells. Which reminds me, as you might have guessed thanks to the intro, prepare to hear the word flipendo a lot.
Flipendo! 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 Flipendo!
While I know saying an incantation is an important part of spellcasting in the Harry Potter universe, I wouldn't mind if in the game it wouldn't happen every single time. What's cool though is that Harry has a totally separate set of voices in the stealth section where he whispers the spells rather than yelling them out. That's good attention to detail. Now, when it comes to music, the game doesn't use John Williams' score from the movie. It's made by a totally different person who is an extremely horrible human being, to the point that I didn't know if I wanted to even mention him in the video or use his work. but after consulting with some people, I decided to both leave his music in and talk about it. The thing is, if you're a Harry Potter fan in 2001, the game's score was as iconic as the movie one, Hogwarts theme especially. The music fits the visuals and mood of the level so well and greatly enhances the magical atmosphere set up by the theme of the world. And while it uses different themes and leitmotifs, the style of music is similar enough to the movie that you feel like they're connected very closely. So just like with visual style, the movie was a clear inspiration, but the game still does something unique on its own, which is great, but I have to admit it's still really weird to listen to the music knowing what its author did. But let's get to the other parts of the game. UI, it's not really good. I don't even know how to explain it, but everything looks hastily slapped together. My first instinct was to criticize the font, but the font is fine and clear and there are no problems with it. The real issue lies with just how everything is put together. I guess the footage shows it best. Plus, the in-game HUD has a severe lack of effects. Icons and numbers just appear and disappear, you're not sure what changes and how. Not only that feels cheap, but it's not clear for the player what happens. Anyway, let's take a look at the score breakdown for aesthetics. Don't forget you can pause the video if you want to read it all. I will assign a 7 to Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The game has a nice visual style and it creates the Harry Potter magical atmosphere in its own unique way, but there is too many technical issues that prevent the aesthetics from reaching their full potential. And now it's time to talk about Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2 and is all about how different game elements connect together to form a wholesome experience. I think in the previous sections I have talked about enough things to make it clear that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is not a fully cohesive game. Not only there is a lot of things that don't make sense, the whole Harry Potter thematic layer is absolutely optional. The game would live fine without it. That said, while the game doesn't need it to work, it does utilize the license well enough to make it feel like you're playing a Harry Potter game, not just because of the name. After all, you do go on lessons here to learn spells and train in their usage. Yes, challenge stars that you collect on your way are a very gamey element, but there is a very nice character moment with Snape where he says that they don't matter in his class.
I see you've collected a few challenge stars, but I'm afraid they have no value in my classroom.
That latest part is actually what cohesion means. A game doesn't have to be realistic or not feel like a game to be cohesive, but its elements need to connect in such a way to serve a greater whole. And the example of Snape and challenge stars certainly fits. Or the whole thing with collecting beans to give them to Fred and George for a secret cutscene. That is something that fits their mischievous characters and connects to our gameplay. So while the license is not used strongly enough in terms of mechanics, what we've got still feels like a Harry Potter game. And if we take a look at what ratings are available for Cohesion, all that would lead to me assigning a 6. While most elements are not connected together in a strong way, it still feels like Harry Potter, and for some, that's enough. It's time to talk about emotions. Emotions is the most subjective category of Stasocritic as it's all about personal feelings, but it also has got the second biggest weight, 3, as enjoyment can be a lot more important than what we consider to be objective arguments. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is a good example of that. I don't know if it's related to nostalgia, maybe there is some bias since I've played this as a child, although I can't say that I felt this history affected me in any way. But despite all the issues in the game, I enjoyed it. Yes, there are frustrating moments, but never so frustrating that you feel like you're raging. You just say, I guess it is what it is, and move on. And it's not a very long game, I think you can beat it in about 5 hours, so it's a nice way to spend an evening or two. I certainly wouldn't try to 100% it or replay ever again after making this video, but if we take a look at the score breakdown for emotions, I will definitely assign an 8. I had a nice, inoffensively enjoyable time, and isn't that what matters anyway? Let's sum everything up. So all scores are in, it's now time to calculate the final Stasocritic rating for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and it's 52. Now, let me be clear, Stasocritic is not Metacritic. 50 means alright, not bad, and Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is certainly that. It's got issues, but nothing big enough to prevent me from recommending it to a Harry Potter fan. It can be a nice time, you just have to know what to expect.
Nintendo! 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 Nintendo!
Thank you all for watching. Make sure to comment below, like, subscribe, and click on the bell button. Special thank you goes to my patrons. If you enjoy my content, please consider checking out my campaign at patreon.com/Farlands. Thank you very much.